I was watching TV with my wife the other night, and we were laughing a lot. The show we were watching is called Ghosts, the US version. There's a story about a woman who inherits a mansion in upstate New York. She and her husband leave their jobs and lives in the city to start a bed and breakfast. The house is inhabited by several ghosts, all from different parts of history. They died either in the house or on the grounds. Desperate to stop the couple from starting a B&B, one of the ghosts, who has the power of being able to move small objects with one finger, pushes a vase off a table in the path of the unsuspecting wife, and she falls down the stairs, putting her in a coma. 3 weeks later, she awakes and can see and communicate with the ghosts of the house. It takes her a while to believe and accept it, but she does, and voila, a show is made. I should point out we watched the original series from the UK first. It was the reason we started watching the US version in the first place. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you this. Well, in the show, the ghosts that passed away did so as long as 1,000 years ago to as early as 25 years ago from the present day. The one that really struck me was a woman named Hetty from the Gilded Age. It is a term coined by Mark Twain and is used to refer to the period roughly from 1865 to 1904. It was a time of rapid economic growth, especially in the northern and western United States. She was the wife of a robber baron. I thought, hey, robber barons were successful entrepreneurs in that time who gained their success through questionable means. You see, growth in America was rapid and unprecedented at that time. It reminded me how the business world exploded after the internet became a viable medium in the early 1990s. Growth was also rapid and unprecedented. So I could easily draw some parallels. As the airing of this podcast, the internet is now over 40 years old, and with things like social media, e-commerce, and the sharing economy, I think we forget what success looked like before the internet. That's what this podcast is all about. It's a bit history, a bit nostalgia, and for some, perhaps a bit of revelation. I hope you will enjoy it. So let's look at a success story on success before the internet. There was success before the internet, you know. We just forgot. Let's get started. Episode 1, Robber Barons. All right, welcome to the show. First and foremost, I want to thank you for listening. I hope to make this pod educational, but also as entertaining as possible. Before we dig into some specific robber barons and make comparisons to what would be considered a robber baron in the internet age, I want to talk about what one is and what they did to earn such a title. What is a robber baron? Robber baron is a term used to describe America's most successful industrialists. As I mentioned before, this term was primarily used during the era of the late 19th century, often known as the Gilded Age. The term robber baron is also used to describe an American capitalist who enriches himself upon the sweat of others, exploited natural resources, or possessed unfair government influence. Basically, their practices were considered unethical or unscrupulous. Examples can include employee or environmental abuse, stock market manipulation, or deliberately restricting output to charge higher prices. The first known uses of the phrase robber baron described feudal lords in medieval Europe who robbed travelers, often merchant ships along the Rhine River as they passed nearby. The term appeared in American newspapers in 1859. Its modern use stems from Matthew Drophetson's The Robber Barons. Robber barons were widely despised and considered aggressive monopolists during their lifetimes. However, later biographies and historical reviews about the Gilded Age's robber barons cast a more complicated and favorable light. Fear over robber barons and their monopolistic practices increased public support for the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. Economic theory says a monopolist earns premium profits by restricting output and raising prices. This only occurs after the monopolist prices out or legally restricts any competing firms in the industry. However, there is no historical evidence that natural monopolies formed before the Sherman Antitrust Act. However, many so-called robber barons became wealthy entrepreneurs through product innovation and business efficiency. Of the goods and services they provided, supply grew and prices fell rapidly, greatly boosting American standard of living. This is opposite of monopolistic behavior. Among common criticisms of the early robber barons included poor working conditions for employees, selfishness, and greed. Some robber barons earn their wealth through political entrepreneurship, or some who seeks to gain profit through subsidies, protection, government contracts, or other such favorable arrangements with governments through political influence. Many wealthy railway tycoons during the 1800s received privileged access and financing from the government via extensive use of lobbyists. They received monopolistic special licenses, per mile subsidies, huge land grants, and low-interest loans. Working conditions in 19th century America were challenging to say the least. While robber barons took advantage of their workers, they sometimes offered better working conditions than the norm of the day. Now, what I would like to do is give you 3 examples of pre-internet robber barons and then compare them with 3 other internet-era robber barons. Now, technically, I can't call the internet-era tycoons, if you will, that term, since it is used to describe another era in history. But you must admit, it would be pretty badass sounding if someone you call that in light of your success. In fact, it would be a pretty cool band name. All right, let's get started talking about some robber barons. J.P. Morgan. John Piermont Morgan was born on April 17, 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, to a New England family. His father, Junius Morgan, founded J.S. Morgan and Company with George Peabody. He was from a wealthy family and is considered by many to have been among the robber barons during America's Gilded Age. Young Morgan was physically imposing, standing 6'2", and he was very muscular with piercing eyes. As a young man, people considered him attractive, though he was shy and socially awkward. He married the only woman he ever loved, Amelia Mimi Sturgis, in 1861, but she died of tuberculosis 4 months after their wedding. J.P. Morgan then made the practical choice of a wife, marrying Frances Tracy in 1865. They had 4 children, but he became a serial philanderer as he accumulated wealth and power. Newspapers frequently attacked him as a robber baron, but he was way more sensitive about his ugly nose than about his business practices. From childhood, J.P. Morgan suffered from acne rosacea, which caused redness in his face and ruptured blood vessels on his nose. In middle age, the rosacea caused rhinophyma, which resulted in growths, lesions, and pockmarks on his nose. J.P. Morgan's nose looked like a purple cauliflower. It was an awful handicap for a self-conscious man who wanted to impress women. His biographer Ron Chernow wrote that people who knew him linked his terrible temper to his nose. The nose certainly contributed to an insecurity and lack of social ease that were thinly masked by a barking voice and tyrannical manner. He once described his enormous purple nose as part of the American structure. Newspaper magnate Joseph Pulitzer often published caricatures of him with an enormous nose. Morgan asked him to stop. Morgan also carefully controlled his public image. He always made sure photographers touched up his nose in photographs. He lashed out at photographers who tried to take his picture in the street, and he would cane with a walking stick any photographer who came near. The public didn't know of his deformed nose, and it came as a shock to meet him face to face. He overcompensated for his handicap by hiring attractive men. A homely man had no chance of being selected a Morgan partner, wrote an early biographer. His associates warned others about his sensitivity. A partner, Dwight Morrow, brought Morgan home one day, having warned his wife Betty and children not to mention the nose. Betty then asked him, "Do you like nose in your tea, Mr. Morgan?" But enough about JP's appearance. Let's talk about why he was considered a wealthy tycoon and a robber baron. At face value, Morgan contributed greatly to American industry. He invested in Thomas Edison and the Edison Electricity Company. He helped create General Electric and International Harvester. He formed J.P. Morgan and Company and gained control of half of the company's railroad mileage. He also created the first billion-dollar company, U.S. Steel. At one point in his life, he was a board member of as many as 48 corporations. However, Morgan engaged in some unethical and anti-competitive practices to ward off competition. For example, he was believed to head a money trust that controlled the banking industry and was commonly considered a figurehead of Wall Street. He also created a monopoly by slashing the workforce and their pay to maximize profits, while eliminating the competition. Workers' wages were often as low as $1 a day or less, and conditions for employees were poor, with increased fatalities even as wages grew. When confronted with the possibility of regulations that could threaten his bottom line, he and other robber barons of the time contributed money to ensure that a business-friendly presidential candidate, William McKinley, was elected in 1896. Despite numerous negatives associated with how Morgan built his wealth, some of his actions did benefit the United States and society. He became so rich and powerful, he saved the federal government from default in 1895 and bailed it out 12 years later, ending the Panic of 1907. He headed an interlocking series of trusts that controlled many of the major industries in the United States. And he created General Electric and helped form U.S. Steel, International Harvester, and AT&T. J.P. Morgan died on March 31st, 1913. He took to his grave his resentment over the phrase, ruby-visaged magnate. Let's talk about another 19th century robber baron, Cornelius Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt was born on May 27, 1794 on Staten Island in New York. He was descended from Dutch settlers of the island. The family name had originally been Vanderbilt. His parents owned a small farm, and his father also worked as a boatman. At the time, the farmers on Staten Island needed to transport their produce to markets in Manhattan, located across New York Harbor. Vanderbilt's father owned a boat used to move cargo across the harbor, and as a boy, young Cornelius worked alongside his father. And a different student, Cornelius learned to read and write and had an aptitude for arithmetic, but his education was limited. What he really enjoyed was working on the water, and when he was 16, he wanted to buy his own boat so he could go into business for himself. An obituary published by the New York Tribune on January 6, 1877, told the story of how Vanderbilt's mother offered to loan him $100 to buy his own boat if he would clear a very rocky field so it could be farmed. Cornelius began the job, but realized he would need help, so he made a deal with other local youths, getting them to assist with the promise that he would give them rides on his new boat. Vanderbilt successfully finished the job of clearing the acreage, borrowed the money, and bought the boat. He soon had a thriving business moving people and produce across the harbor to Manhattan, and was able to pay back his mother. Sounds like Cornelius was getting an early start at what would later become an illustrious career at being a robber baron. Mad negotiating skills. Vanderbilt married a distant cousin when he was 19, and he and his wife would eventually have 13 children. He capitalized on the War of 1812. When the war began, forts were garrisoned in New York Harbor in anticipation of an attack by the British. The island forts needed to be supplied, and Vanderbilt, already known as a very hard worker, secured the government contract. He prospered during the war, delivering supplies and ferrying soldiers about the harbor. Investing money back into the business, he bought more sailing ships. Within a few years, Vanderbilt recognized the value of steamboats, and in 1818 he began working for another businessman, Thomas Gibbons, who operated a steamboat ferry between New York City and New Brunswick, New Jersey. Thanks to his fanatical devotion to his work, Vanderbilt made a ferry service very profitable. He even combined the ferry line with a hotel for the passengers in New Jersey. Vanderbilt's wife managed the hotel. At the time, Robert Fulton and his partner Robert Livingston had a monopoly on steamboats on the Hudson River, thanks to New York state law. Vanderbilt fought the law, and eventually the U.S. Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice John Marshall, ruled it invalid in a landmark decision. Vanderbilt was thus able to expand his business further. In 1829, Vanderbilt broke away from Gibbons and began operating his own fleet of boats. Vanderbilt's steamboats plied the Hudson River, where he reduced fares to the point that competitors dropped out of the market. Branching out, Vanderbilt began steamship service between New York and cities in New England and the town on Long Island. Vanderbilt had dozens of steamships built, and the ships were known to be reliable and safe at a time when travel by steamboat could be rough or dangerous. His business boomed. By the time Vanderbilt was 40 years old, he was well on his way to becoming a millionaire. When the California gold rush came along in 1849, Vanderbilt began an ocean-going service taking people bound for the west coast to Central America. After landing in Nicaragua, the travelers would cross to the Pacific and continue their sea journey. In an incident that became legendary, a company that partnered with Vanderbilt in the Central American enterprise refused to pay him. He remarked that suing them in court would take too long, so he would simply ruin them. Vanderbilt managed to undercut their prices and put the other company out of business within 2 years. He became adept at using such monopolistic tactics against competitors, and businesses who went up against Vanderbilt were often made to suffer. He did, however, have a grudging respect for some rivals of business, such as another steamboat operator, Daniel Drew. In the 1850s, Vanderbilt began to sense that more money was to be made in railroads than on water, so he began scaling back his nautical interests while buying up railroad stocks. By the late 1860s, Vanderbilt was a force in the railroad business. He had bought up several railroads in the New York area, putting them together to form the New York Central and the Hudson River Railroad, one of the first great corporations. When Vanderbilt tried to gain control of the Erie Railroad, conflicts with other businessmen, including the secretive and shady Jay Gould and the flamboyant Jim Fisks, became known as the Erie Railroad War. Vanderbilt, whose son William H. Vanderbilt was now working with him, eventually came to control much of the railroad business in the United States. Vanderbilt lived in a lavish townhouse and owned an elaborate private stable in which he kept some of the finest horses in America. Many afternoons he would drive a carriage through Manhattan, enjoying moving along at the fastest speed possible. When he was nearly 70 years old in 1868, his wife Sophia died. Vanderbilt then went to Canada and on August 21, 1869, in London, Ontario, married a cousin from Mobile, Alabama. She had an unusual name for a woman, Frank Armstrong Crawford. Vanderbilt's second wife convinced him to give $1 million to the largest charitable gift in American history to that date, to Bishop Holland Nimmons McIntyre, the husband of her cousin, Amelia Townsend, to found Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, named in his honor. He also paid $50,000 for a church for a second wife's congregation, the Church of the Strangers. In addition, he donated to churches around New York, including a gift to the Moravian Church on Staten Island of 8.5 acres for a cemetery, which he was buried there. After a prolonged series of illnesses, Vanderbilt died on January 4, 1877, at the age of 82, at his residence. He was confined to his house for about 8 months. The immediate cause of death was exhaustion, brought on by long suffering from a complication of chronic disorders. Reporters had been gathered outside his townhouse in New York City, and the news of his death, of the Commodore, filled newspapers for days afterward. Respecting his wishes, his funeral was a fairly modest affair. He was buried in a cemetery not far from where he grew up on Staten Island. At the time of his death, age 82, Vanderbilt had an estimated worth of $105 million. That's almost $3 billion in today's dollars. Okay, it seems like these robber barons are cut from the same cloth. Let's look at one more robber baron and see if these colors run. Alright, let's look at some more 19th century robber barons. John D. Rockefeller. John Davidson Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839, to William Avery Rockefeller and Eliza Davidson in Richford, New York. His family later moved near Cleveland, Ohio, where he attended Cleveland's Central High School before dropping out and starting his first job as an assistant bookkeeper, earning 50 cents per day. With the money he saved from his first job and a loan from his entrepreneurial snake oil salesman father, he opened his first business, a commodities brokerage, in 1859. Around the same time, in nearby Titusville, Pennsylvania, Edwin Drake and the Seneca Oil Company completed their first drilled oil well. The discovery of large underground oil reservoirs made it accessible with new drilling technology, created a boom of oil companies in Pennsylvania and Ohio. In 1870, Rockefeller joined the oil business, along with his brother William Samuel Andrews, Henry M. Flagler, and Stephen V. Harkness. Their business, the Standard Oil Company of Ohio, focused on oil refining, which had fewer variable costs than oil exploration and drilling. Rockefeller's contemporaries often commented on his fixation with cost-saving and waste reduction. But to be the best, he also invested in research and development. Standard Oil bought as much labor in-house as they could and focused on finding markets for refining byproducts. After knowingly buying fields in Ohio containing sour oil, Rockefeller relied on his research and development team to create a way to remove the oil impurities, which they eventually did, allowing him to cash in on oil no one else wanted. Rockefeller's lack of opulence was also evident in his home life. He had married Laura Celestia Seti Spellman in 1864, and together they raised their children, Bessie, Alice, who died as an infant, Alta, Edith, and John Jr., in a devoutly Baptist household. Although they lived comfortably at their mansion on Euclid Avenue and their Forest Hill summer home, they avoided extravagant possessions. John D. Rockefeller created the Standard Oil Company, the success of which made him the world's first billionaire and a celebrated philanthropist. He garnered both admirers and critics during his lifetime and after his death. Wall Street idolized his money-making abilities, muckrake journalists exposed his unethical business practices, and his charitable causes created a legacy of generosity. While free market capitalism led to the creation of numerous oil companies, it also, to Rockefeller, created unpredictable chaos in the industry, with oil refiners undercutting each other on prices, creating wide fluctuations. To remove this marketplace inefficiency, Rockefeller began acquiring competing oil refineries. Within the first 3 months of 1872, he had bought out, shut down, or bankrupted 22 of his 26 Cleveland competitors. Unsympathetic to goodwill pricing, he offered a fair market price for refineries that were losing money with outdated equipment. However, as journalists later pointed out, the refineries were losing money because of Standard Oil's monopoly. Its very size meant that Standard Oil, unlike other refineries, could negotiate a railroad discount by promising 60 carloads of oil daily, which appealed to railroad owners wanting to maintain a high and steady volume. These train rebates helped Standard Oil keep transportation costs low. Other refineries could not compete. Oil and railroad tycoons proposed a deal to fix transportation costs called the Southern Improvement Company, but public outcry quickly stopped further negotiations. In 1882, Standard Oil Trust created a network of Standard Oil companies throughout the country, led by a board of trustees where Rockefeller owned over one-third of the certificates. By the late 1880s, Standard Oil controlled 90% of American refineries. This control of the market, along with the Southern Improvement Company scandal, caught the attention of politicians who started passing antitrust laws and prohibiting train rebates. Rockefeller had a strict no talking to the press rule, which did nothing to combat the widely popular scathing critique of Standard Oil by journalists Ida Tarbell. Rockefeller eventually retired from daily operations in 1895 at the age of 56, but stayed in a figurehead role as president. In 1911, the Supreme Court found Standard Oil in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. As a result, Standard Oil was split into 34 independent companies, although over time these corporate descendants regrew into large integrated oil companies that still dominate the market, such as ExxonMobil. The Supreme Court case also hadn't slowed Rockefeller's wealth. Newspaper headlines from 1916 announced that he was the world's first billionaire. According to Forbes, Rockefeller's total assets in 1937 equaled 1.5% of America's total economic output for that same year, making him one of the wealthiest people in the world to this day. In comparison, Bill Gates' wealth in 2018 would be 0.45% of 2018 GDP. He was often approached about donating his money to various causes. His publicist, Ivy Lee, hired after the antitrust case, cultivated the notion of a benign old man giving away dimes and preoccupied with charity, according to one biographer. Rockefeller and his family established the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, which supported public health causes through a large endowment. He also used his money to establish the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. His goal as a young adult was to make $100,000 and live to be 100 years old. While he surpassed his financial goal, John D. Rockefeller died on May 23, 1937, at the ripe old age of 98. Wow. I gotta say, these three robber barons had a lot in common. Except for J.P. Morgan, they all started out modestly. But as time grew, every one of them used their ingenuity to take advantage of a situation, whether it be born into a banking family like J.P. Morgan, learning to boat when you were young like Cornelius Vanderbilt, or taking advantage of new drilling techniques in the search of oil in the case of Rockefeller. They also engaged in some pretty skeezy practices to keep building their fortunes. I mean, in JP's case, heading a trust that controls the money industry, isn't that practically like printing money? Or in Vanderbilt's case, deciding that it's cheaper to undercut your competition and put them out of business instead of going to court? Man, that's badass. Rockefeller was no different. When he was so big and efficient with Standard Oil that nobody could compete with him, and then to add insult to industry, he would just acquire you for a song. Okay, now I know I could have mentioned a lot of other 19th century tycoons or captains of industry that were considered robber barons. For example, Andrew Carnegie, John Jacob Astor, James Fisk, John Warren Gates. There are others, but I'm trying to keep this podcast down to a manageable time frame. Now that we know what a 19th century robber baron looks like, I've come up with a list of what defines a robber baron. They need to meet some or all of the following criteria. 1. Exploit their workers. 2. Employed political entrepreneurship. 3. Engaged in monopolistic practices. 4. Engaged in philanthropy later in their careers. Before I get into the lives of what I consider a modern-day robber baron, I just want to let you know that I'm not going to go into full detail about them. The goal is to give enough detail to evaluate them against the criteria I set out on what makes a robber baron based on the 19th century ones I described. There is just so much information available on the lives of these guys. Thank you, Internet. All right, let's look at some modern-day entrepreneurs and see how they measure up. Bill Gates. Bill Gates, born William Henry Gates III, is an American businessperson, software developer, and philanthropist. Gates co-founded the computer technology company Microsoft in 1975 and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2000 with his former wife, Melinda Gates. His charitable efforts have focused on global health and climate change. He is best known for co-founding the software giant Microsoft along with his childhood friend Paul Allen. During his career at Microsoft, Gates held the positions of chairman, chief executive officer, president, and chief software architect, while also being its largest individual shareholder until May 2014. He was a prominent pioneer of the microcomputer revolution of the 1970s and 1980s. Gates was born and raised in Seattle, Washington. In 1975, he and Paul Allen founded Microsoft in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Gates led the company as its chairman and chief executive officer until stepping down as CEO in January 2000, succeeded by Steve Ballmer, but he remained chairman of the board of directors and became chief software architect. During the late 1990s, he was criticized for his business tactics, which were considered anti-competitive. I'll get into that a little later. Unfortunately, this opinion has been upheld by numerous court rulings for all you Gates fans. In June 2008, Gates transitioned into a part-time role at Microsoft and full-time work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the private charitable foundation he and his then-wife Melinda had established. He stepped down as chairman of the Microsoft board in February 2014 and assumed the role of technology advisor to support newly appointed CEO Satya Nadella. In March 2020, Gates left his board positions at Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway to focus on his philanthropic efforts on climate change, global health and development, and education. Since 1987, Gates has been included in the Forbes list of the world's billionaires. He was surpassed by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, which we'll talk about later in the podcast, who had an estimated net worth of US $90.6 billion, compared to Gates' net worth of US $89.9 billion at the time. Whew, that was a close race. Okay, let's talk a bit about the time at a little company called Microsoft. Bill first started out in the 70s by providing operating system code for what most people interested in a computer call a hobby computer, called the MITS Altair 8800. It was a programming language called BASIC. It was Microsoft's foundational product, except it was Microsoft with a dash between the micro and the soft. It didn't change until what we know today, until 1979. He made his way into PC mainstream by contracting Tim Patterson to adapt the OS like the CP/M operating system called 86DOS for IBM. The genius of it all is that Bill did not transfer the copyright to IBM. He thought that there was more value in the software if other hardware makers got on board and needed similar software, which they did. And that is how Microsoft got its start. Of course, we know that Windows with the graphical user interface, or GUI, that started in 1985 and went from Windows 1, 3.1, 3.11, NT, 95, 98, ME, 2000, XP, 7, 8, 8.1, 10, and of course 11. I probably missed some versions, but you get the gist. All right, let's get into some dirt. During his tenure as CEO of Microsoft, Gates approved of many decisions that led to antitrust litigation over Microsoft's business practices. I will start with the Gates United States Microsoft antitrust case and European Union Microsoft competition case that began in August of 1998. The Federal Trade Commission began an inquiry over whether Microsoft was abusing its monopoly in the PC operating system market, in which Microsoft consented not to tie other Microsoft products to the sale of Windows, but remain free to integrate additional features into the operating system. In the years that followed, Microsoft insisted that the Internet Explorer was not a product, but a feature that it was allowed to add to Windows, although the DOJ did not agree with this definition. The government alleged that Microsoft had abused monopoly power on Intel-based personal computers in its handling of operating system and web browser integration. The central issue was whether Microsoft was allowed to bundle its IE web browser software with its Windows operating system. Bundling the two products was allegedly a key factor in Microsoft's victory in the browser wars of the late 1990s, as every Windows user had a copy of IE. It was further alleged that this restricted the market for competing web browsers such as Netscape Navigator or Opera, since it typically took extra time to buy and install the competing browsers. I really don't know about buying, like they're pretty much free download, but whatever. Underlying these disputes were questions of whether Microsoft had manipulated its application browsing interfaces to favor IE over third-party browsers. The government also questioned Microsoft's conduct in enforcing restrictive licensing agreements with original equipment manufacturers who were required to include that arrangement. Microsoft argued that the merging of Windows IE was the result of innovation and competition, that the two were now the same product and inextricably linked, that consumers were receiving the benefits of IE for free. Opponents countered that IE was still a separate product that did not need to be tied to Windows, since a separate version of IE was available for Mac OS. They also asserted that IE was not really free because its development and marketing costs may have inflated the price of Windows. The case ruled that Microsoft had committed monopolization, tying and blocking competition, each in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. Oh boy, wasn't that the act legislated because of the actions of the traditional robber barons we mentioned in the beginning? Secondly, in the early 1980s, while business partner Paul Allen was undergoing treatments for cancer, Gates, according to Allen, conspired to reduce the latter's share in Microsoft by issuing himself stock options. In his autobiography, Allen would later recall that Gates was scheming to rip me off. It was mercenary opportunism, plain and simple. Microsoft had been criticized for the use of permatemp employees employed for years as temporary and therefore without medical benefits. Use of forced retention tactics, where departing employees would be sued to prevent departure, as well as more traditional cost-saving measures ranging from cutting medical benefits to not providing towels in the company locker rooms. Oh my gosh. Microsoft is often referred to as a velvet sweatshop, a term which originated in a 1989 Seattle Times article and later became used to describe the company by some of Microsoft's own employees. This characterization is derived from the perception that Microsoft provides nearly everything for its employees in a convenient place, but in turn overworks them to a point where it would be bad for their, possibly long-term, health. For example, the kitchenettes have free beverages, and many buildings include exercise rooms and showers. However, the company has been accused of attempting to keep employees at the company for exceptionally long hours. This is detailed in several books about Microsoft, including Hard Drive, Bill Gates and the Making of the Microsoft Empire. A U.S. state lawsuit was brought against Microsoft in 1992, representing 8,558 current and former employees that had been classified as temporary and freelance and became known as Vincano versus Microsoft. In 1993, the suit became a U.S. federal class action in the United States District Court, Western District of Washington at Seattle. The final settlement came in 2005. The case was decided on the IRS-defined basis that such permatemps had their jobs defined by Microsoft, worked alongside regular employees doing the same work, and worked for long terms. After a series of court setbacks, including 3 reversals on appeal, Microsoft settled the suit for US $97 million. Microsoft is the largest American corporate user of the H-1B visa, worker visas, and has joined other large technology companies like Google and recently lobbying for looser H-1B visa restrictions. Now, Bill does give to charity through the foundation between him and his now ex-wife Melinda Gates. They have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This foundation is the merging of the William H. Gates Foundation and the Gates Learning Foundation. Based in Seattle, Washington, it was launched in 2000 and is reported as of 2020 to be the second largest charitable foundation in the world, holding $69 billion in assets. On his 43rd birthday, Bill Gates gave the foundation $1 billion. The primary stated goals of the foundation are to enhance healthcare and reduce extreme poverty across the world, and to expand educational opportunities and access to information technology in the U.S. Key individuals of the foundation include Bill Gates, Melinda French Gates, Warren Buffett, Chief Executive Officer Mark Zuckerberg, and Michael Larson. The foundation had an endowment of approximately $67.3 billion as of December 31st, 2022. The scale of the foundation and the way it seeks to apply business techniques to giving makes it one of the leaders in venture philanthropy, though the foundation itself notes that the philanthropic role has limitations. In 2007, its founders were ranked as the second most generous philanthropists in the U.S., behind Warren Buffett. As of 2018, Bill Gates and Melinda French Gates had donated around $36 billion to the foundation. Since its founding, the foundation has endowed and supported a broad range of social, health, and education developments, including the establishments of the Gates Cambridge Scholarship at Cambridge University. It is into a lot of charitable programs like infectious disease control, STD control, including basic health care, basic sanitation, and agriculture development, to name a few. This, of course, totals billions of dollars, but do not get too caught up in this philanthropic work. Despite all he gives, Tim Schwab from The Nation points out, after 2 decades of philanthropic giving, Bill Gates continues to be one of the richest people on the planet. He boasts a private fortune of $117 billion, and that's after his costly divorce from Melinda, whose bank account today exceeds $10 billion. He also oversees the Gates Foundation's $67 billion endowment. The combined $184 billion he controls surpasses the gross domestic product of virtually every poor nation in which the Gates Foundation works today. Furthermore, in his book, The Bill Gates Problem, Tim Schwab goes on to say, it shows how Gates' billions have purchased a stunning level of control over public policy, private markets, scientific research, and the news media. Whether he is pushing a new educational standard in America, health reforms in India, global vaccine policy during the pandemic, or Western industrialized aquaculture throughout Africa, Gates' heady social experimentation has shown itself to be not only undemocratic, but also ineffective. In many places, Bill Gates is hurting the very people he intends to help. He claims that all this charitable work is really just a way to curry favor politically and force his idea on how to solve the world's problems, while only giving a fraction of his fortune away, keeping it most for himself. Interesting. Okay, let's take stock of Bill Gates and see if he meets the criteria for a robber baron. 1. Exploited workers. From what I found, there were accounts as early as 1989 showing that employees were being mistreated. With amenities meant to keep them at work as long as possible, free drinks anyone? To permanent temporary employment, burnout, I would say yes. Bill, like most tech tycoons, was a very demanding boss who could be demeaning. 2. Employed political entrepreneurship. From what I have shown, it looks like a lot of his philanthropic efforts are a veiled attempt at this. Hey, who wants to tell a guy with all the money he can't do what he wants? That's like telling the neighborhood kid who owns the best bike in town he can't ride it. 3. Engage in monopolistic practices. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, hell yeah, trying to package your web browser with your OS, cutting out any chance that a user would want to install a competing browser? Oh, but it's just so convenient. Why would I want to try Netscape or Opera? Well, the truth is, for me anyways, I've installed another browser. Sorry, Bill, Internet Explorer sucks. The Edge browser today sucks, maybe a bit less. 4. Engage in philanthropy later in their career. Yes, that would be true, but others think it's just a charade and rather ineffective. Well, I tell it 4 out of 4. I will absolutely say Bill Gates is a robber baron. If he didn't write the book on being one, he at least studied it a lot. Okay, let's look at another internet era tycoon. Jeff Bezos was born on January 12, 1964 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He played a key role in the growth of e-commerce as a founder and chief executive officer of Amazon.com Incorporated, an online merchant of books and later of a wide variety of products. Under his guidance, Amazon became the largest retailer on the World Wide Web and the model for internet sales. While still in high school, Bezos developed the Dream Institute, a center that promoted creative thinking in young students. After graduating in 1986 summa cum laude from Princeton University with degrees in electrical engineering and computer science, he undertook a series of jobs before joining the New York investment firm D.E. Shaw & Company in 1990. Soon named senior vice president, the firm's youngest, Bezos was in charge of examining the investment possibilities of the internet and its enormous potential. Web usage was growing by more than 2,000% a year. This sparked his entrepreneurial imagination. In 1994, he quit D.E. Shaw and moved to Seattle, Washington to open a virtual bookstore. Working out of his garage with a handful of employees, Bezos began developing the software for the site. Named after the South American River, Amazon sold its first book in July of 1995. Amazon quickly became the leader in e-commerce. Open 24 hours a day, the site was user-friendly, encouraging browsers to post their own reviews of books and offering discounts, personalized recommendations, and searches for out-of-print books. In June 1998, it began selling CDs, and later that year, it added videos. In 1999, Bezos added auctions to the site and invested in other virtual stores. The success of Amazon encouraged other retailers, including major book chains, to establish online stores. As more companies battled for internet dollars, Bezos saw the need for diversity, and by 2005, Amazon offered a vast array of products, including consumer electronics, apparel, and hardware. Amazon diversified even further in 2006 by introducing Amazon Web Services, a cloud computing service that eventually became the largest service in the world. In late 2007, Amazon released a new handheld reading device called the Kindle, a digital book reader with wireless internet connectivity, enabling customers to purchase, download, read, and store a vast selection of books on demand. Amazon announced in 2010 that sales of the Kindle had surpassed those of hardcover books. That same year, Amazon moved into making its own television shows and movies with its Amazon Studio division. Amazon's yearly net sales increased from $510,000 in 1995 to some $600 million in 1998, and from more than $19.1 billion in 2008 and almost $233 billion in 2018. About half of the company's operating income in 2018 was derived from AWS. 2 years later, Amazon registered record profits, and its revenue in the fourth quarter that year that surpassed $100 billion for the first time. The unprecedented numbers were in part caused by a rise in home shopping during the COVID-19 pandemic. In February 2021, Bezos announced that he would be stepping down as CEO later that year. However, he planned to remain at Amazon as executive chairman. Aside from Amazon, Bezos founded a spaceflight company, Blue Origin, in 2000. Blue Origin bought a launch site in Texas and soon thereafter planned to introduce a crewed suborbital spaceflight, New Shepard, in 2018 and an orbital launch vehicle, New Glenn, in 2020. Bezos bought the Washington Post and affiliated publications for $250 million in 2013. Bezos' net worth was calculated in 2018 at $112 billion, making him the richest person in the world. Now, we investigated how Jeff Bezos would be considered a robber baron, and this is what I found. In May 2014, the International Trade Union Confederation named Bezos the world's worst boss, with its General Secretary, Sharon Voro, saying, Jeff Bezos represents the inhumanity of employers who are promoting the North American corporate model, while in 2019, Harvard Business Review, which ranked Bezos the best performing CEO for 4 years in a row since 2014, did not even rank him in the top 100, citing Amazon's relatively low ESG, environment, social, and governance scores that reflect risks created by working conditions and employment policies, data security, and antitrust issues. Is this true? World's worst boss? Well, maybe if you work at one of Amazon's warehouses. For the sake of brevity, I won't tell you all the stories, but I will tell you one to illustrate my point. As recently as December 2022, workers at Amazon warehouse in Colorado allege Amazon made them work in close proximity to the corpse of a worker who died on the job after collapsing on the floor. One employee anonymously told The Guardian that they didn't hear about the worker's death until another worker told them about it in the break room. There are a few more stories to tell like the one I mentioned, and the severity is the same. The total number of deaths at Amazon facilities remains unknown. However, a group of lawmakers, including Reps Cori Bush, Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, and Senators Sherrod Brown and Elizabeth Warren are demanding that Amazon provide a 10-year list of all Amazon workers who have died while on the job, accompanied with explanations of how each worker died. Amazon has proven time and again that it views workers as a disposable means to achieving greater profits. Amazon earned $21 billion in 2020 alone, and its workers have made founder Jeff Bezos the wealthiest person in the world, with a staggering net worth of $184 billion, the letter from Congress read. In sharp contrast, many of Amazon's employees are forced to subsidize their low wages with government assistance such as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and Medicaid. Now, some might say that Jeff Bezos and Amazon is a monopoly, but that is simply not true. As much as Amazon seems ubiquitous with the concept of e-commerce, there are several firms, online or brick and mortar, who can compete. William F. Shugart II of The Telegraph writes, "The FTC portrays Amazon as a monopoly by narrowing the relevant market to online superstores. That definition conveniently limits Amazon's competitors to Walmart and Target. But doing so willfully ignores America's 1 million plus brick and mortar retailers and other online sellers like eBay, Kroger, Etsy, Best Buy, Wayfair, Zara, Chewy, and thousands of mom-and-pop specialty shops that compete with Amazon in niche markets every day. If those rivals were included, and how could they not be, Amazon's share of total retail sales nationwide would be no more than 6%. All right, let's talk about philanthropy. This is just a brief rundown of some of Jeff Bezos' efforts. In 2013, he pledged $500,000 to World Reader, a nonprofit founded by a former Amazon employee. In May 2017, Bezos gave $1 million to the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, which provides pro bono legal services for American journalists. Multiple opinion columns have asked Bezos to pay higher wages to Amazon warehouse workers. I agree. Charity should start in the home. A year later in June, he tweeted that he would announce 2 philanthropic efforts by the end of summer 2018. Bezos announced in September 2018 that he would commit approximately $2 billion to a fund to deal with American homelessness and establish a network of nonprofit preschools for low-income communities. In June 2018, Bezos donated to Breakthrough Energy Ventures, a private philanthropic fund founded by Bill Gates aimed at promoting emissions-free energy. In September 2018, Bezos donated $10 million to With Honor, a nonpartisan organization that works to increase the number of veterans in political office. In February 2020, Bezos pledged $10 billion to combat climate change through the Bezos Earth Fund. Later that year, in November, Bezos announced $791 million of donations to established well-known groups, with $100 million each going to the Environmental Defense, Natural Resources Defense Council, the Nature Conservancy, World Resources Institute, and the World Wildlife Fund, and the remainder going to 11 other groups. In April 2020, early in the COVID-19 pandemic, Bezos donated $100 million to food banks through Feeding America. In November 2021, Bezos pledged to donate $2 billion towards restructuring food systems and nature conservation at the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference. In November 2022, Bezos granted a $100 million Courage and Civility Award to singer Dolly Parton in recognition of her charity work focused on improving children's literacy around the world. On November 22, 2022, Jeff Bezos awarded $123 million to organizations that are engaged in relocating homeless families to permanent housing. Day One Families Fund grants, the amounts of which vary in monetary terms, will be sent to 40 organizations across the country. Interestingly enough, in September 2018, Business Insider reported that Bezos was the only one of the top 5 billionaires in the world who had not signed the Giving Pledge, an initiative created by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett to encourage wealthy people to give away a majority of their wealth. Let's run the numbers. From the list above, I calculated roughly $15 billion in donations. As of the writing of this podcast, he is worth $180 billion. Even if my estimate is off by $1 billion, it's still a drop in the bucket. Here's what Marina Hyde from The Guardian had to say. According to what Bezos told CNN, philanthropy is really hard. It certainly seems to be for him. I do recall he was only dragged kicking and screaming to the giving a shit game, having spent years accruing billions before it was finally pointed out to him that not having some kind of philanthropic arm looked very abysmal. In 2017, Bezos asked Twitter users for ideas on how to help the world in the here and now, before embarking on a truly committed program of ignoring every single one of them who suggested paying his workers properly and contributing his fair tax. Marina says, in relative terms, what he gives compared to a workaday individual like us is equivalent to about $50 to charity. She also points out we pay more tax, so he is no better. She also goes on to say, he actually uttered the words, the only way that I can see to deploy this much financial resource is by converting my Amazon winnings into space travel. That was the same year Amazon helped kill a Seattle tax on big firms to alleviate the homelessness crisis by threatening to pull a huge building project. The business and tech commentator Scott Galloway calls Bezos the mother of all welfare queens for the vast benefits he's drawn from public money and the tax breaks he remorselessly chases and demands. This sounds like a bit of political entrepreneurship to me. Okay, let's look at Jeff Bezos and see if he meets the criteria for a robber baron. 1. Exploited workers. Well, working conditions in several of Amazon's warehouses resulted in death. Also breaking up unionized initiatives? That's textbook robber baron. 2. Employed in political entrepreneurship. As I mentioned above, meddling with a tax bill in Seattle that was supposed to alleviate homelessness and threatening to move his tax dollars elsewhere? Yeah, I think so. 3. Engaged in monopolistic practices. As big as Amazon is, there are a lot of retailers who do just fine in this space. Online retailers alone, you have Alibaba, eBay, Etsy, Wayfair, and that's not counting brick and mortar stores like Walmart and Target, etc. Number 4, engaged in philanthropy later in their career. It looks like Jeff likes to dabble a bit in philanthropy, about to the tune of about 8% of his net worth. Well, I tallied 3 out of 4. I will say Jeff Bezos is a robber baron, but only B+. Don't worry, he'll get there. On to the final modern-day robber baron. Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Elliott Zuckerberg was born on May 14, 1984. He is an American businessman and philanthropist. He co-founded the social media service Facebook along with his Harvard roommates in 2004 and its parent company Meta Platforms, formerly Facebook Inc., of which he's the executive chairman, chief executive officer, and controlling shareholder. Zuckerberg briefly attended Harvard University, where he launched Facebook in February 2004 with his roommates Eduardo Saverin, Andrew McCullum, Dustin Moskovitz, and Chris Hughes. Originally launched in only select college campuses, the site expanded rapidly and eventually beyond colleges, reaching 1 billion users in 2012. Zuckerberg took the company public in May 2012 with majority shares. In 2007, at age 23, he was the world's youngest self-made billionaire at the time. He has since used his funds to organize multiple philanthropic endeavors, including the establishment of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. Time named Zuckerberg one of the most influential people in the world in 2008, 2011, 2016, and 2019, and nominated him as a finalist several other times. He was named the Time Person of the Year in 2010, the same year when Facebook eclipsed more than 500 million users. In December 2016, Zuckerberg was ranked 10th on the Forbes list of world's most powerful people. In the Forbes 400 list of wealthiest Americans in 2023, he was ranked 8th with a personal wealth of $106 billion. As of February 2024, Zuckerberg's net worth was estimated at $167 billion by Forbes, making him the fourth richest person in the world. A film depicting Zuckerberg's early career, legal troubles, and initial success with Facebook, the social network, was released in 2010 and won multiple Academy Awards. Zuckerberg began using computers and writing software in middle school. In high school, he built a program that allowed all the computers between his house and his father's dental office to communicate with each other. During Zuckerberg's high school years, he worked to build a music player called the Synapse Media Player. The device used machine learning to learn the user's listening habits, which was posted to Slashdot and received a rating of 3 out of 5 from PC Magazine. The New Yorker once said of Zuckerberg, "Some kids played computer games. Mark created them." The New Yorker noted that by the time Zuckerberg began classes at Harvard in 2002, he had already achieved a reputation as a programming prodigy. He studied psychology and computer science and belonged to Alpha Epsilon Pi and Kirkland House. In his second year, he wrote a program that he called Course Match, which allowed users to make class selection decisions based on the choices of other students and helped them form study groups. Later, he created a different program he initially called Face Mash and let students select the best-looking person from a choice of photos. Ari Hazit, Zuckerberg's roommate at the time, explained, "We had books called Facebooks, which included the names and pictures of everyone who lived in the student dorms. At first, he built a site and placed 2 pictures of 2 males and 2 females. Visitors to the site had to choose who was hotter, and according to the votes, there would be a ranking. The site went up over the weekend, but by Monday morning, the college had shut it down because its popularity had overwhelmed one of Harvard's network switches, preventing students from accessing the internet." I think that's what they call a broadcast storm in network terms. In addition, many students complained that their photos were being used without permission. Zuckerberg apologized publicly, and the student paper ran articles stating that the site was completely improper. In January 2004, Zuckerberg began writing code for a new website. On February 4th, 2004, Zuckerberg launched the Facebook, originally located at thefacebook.com, in partnership with his roommates Eduardo Saverin, Andrew McCollum, Dustin Moskovitz, and Chris Hughes. An earlier inspiration for Facebook may have come from Phillips Exeter Academy, the prep school from which Zuckerberg graduated in 2002. It published its own student directory, the Photo Address Book, which students referred to as the Facebook. Such photo directories were an important part of the student's social experience at many private schools. With them, students were able to list attributes such as their class years, their friends, and their telephone numbers. 6 days after the site launched, 3 Harvard seniors, Cameron Winklevoss, Tyler Winklevoss, and Dia Nadera, accused Zuckerberg of intentionally misleading them into believing that they would help them build a social network called HarvardConnection.com, when he was using their ideas to build a competing product. The 3 complained to the Harvard Crimson, and the newspaper began an investigation in response. While Zuckerberg tried to convince the editors not to run the story, he also broke into 2 of the editors' email accounts, for which he made use of their private login data logs from the Facebook. Following the official launch of the Facebook social media platform, the 3 filed a lawsuit against Zuckerberg that resulted in a settlement. The agreed settlement was for 1.2 million Facebook shares and $20 million in cash. Zuckerberg's Facebook started off as just a Harvard thing until he decided to spread it to other schools. Enlisting the help of roommate and co-founder Dustin Moskovitz, they began with Columbia University, New York University, Stanford University, Dartmouth College, Cornell University, University of Pennsylvania, Brown University, and Yale University. Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard in his sophomore year to complete the project. Zuckerberg, Moskovitz, and the other co-founders moved to Palo Alto, California, where they leased a small house that served as an office. Over the summer, Zuckerberg met Peter Thiel, who invested in his company. They got their first office in mid-2004. According to Zuckerberg, the group planned to return to Harvard, but eventually decided to remain in California, where Zuckerberg appreciated the mythical place of Silicon Valley, the center of computer technology in California. In 2010, Stephen Levy, who wrote the 1984 book Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution, wrote that Zuckerberg clearly thinks of himself as a hacker. Zuckerberg said that it's okay to break things to make them better. Facebook instituted hackathons held every 6 to 8 weeks where participants would have one night to conceive of and complete a project. The company provided music, food, and beer at the hackathons, and many Facebook staff members, including Zuckerberg, regularly attended. The idea is that you can build something really good in a night, Zuckerberg told Levi, and that's part of the personality of Facebook now. It's definitely very core to my personality. In 2007, Zuckerberg was added to MIT Technology Review's TR35 list as one of the top 35 innovators in the world under the age of 35. Vanity Fair magazine named Zuckerberg number 1 on its 2010 list of the top 100 most influential people of the information age. Zuckerberg ranked number 23 on Vanity Fair's 100 list in 2009. In 2010, Zuckerberg was chosen as number 16 in the New Statement's annual survey of the world's 50 most influential figures. In a 2011 interview with PBS shortly after the death of Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg said that Jobs had advised him on how to create a management team at Facebook that was focused on building as high quality and good things as you are. Zuckerberg was the keynote speaker at the 2014 Mobile World Congress held in Barcelona, Spain in March 2014, which was attended by 75,000 delegates. Various media sources highlighted the connection between Facebook's focus on mobile technology and Zuckerberg's speech, stating that mobile represents the future of the company. Zuckerberg's speech expands upon the goal that he raised at the TechCrunch conference in September 2013, where he was working towards expanding internet coverage into developing countries. Alongside other American technology figures like Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook, Zuckerberg hosted visiting Chinese politician Liu Wei, known as the Internet Czar, for his influence in the enforcement of Chinese online policy at Facebook headquarters on December 8, 2014. The meeting occurred after Zuckerberg participated in a Q&A session at the Tsinghua University in Beijing, China on October 23, 2014, where he conversed in Mandarin Chinese. Although Facebook is banned in China, Zuckerberg is highly regarded among the people and was at the university to help fuel the nation's burgeoning entrepreneur sector. Zuckerberg fielded questions during a live Q&A session at the company's headquarters in Menlo Park on December 11, 2014. The founder and CEO explained that he does not believe Facebook is a waste of time because it facilitates social engagement, and participating in a public session was so that he could learn how to better serve the community. I don't know. I've been on Facebook since the beginning. I think it's not a waste of time per se, but I have wasted a lot of time on the platform. But I digress. Zuckerberg receives a $1 salary as CEO of Facebook. In June 2016, Business Insider named Zuckerberg one of the top 10 business visionaries creating value for the world, along with Elon Musk and Sal Khan, since he and his wife pledged to give away 99% of their wealth, then estimated at $55 billion. As you know, every tech tycoon is not without their lawsuits, and Mark Zuckerberg has a few, but not what you would think a robber baron would be sued for. Let's get into it. We already briefly touched on this. Harvard students Cameron Winklevoss, Tyler Winklevoss, and Divya Narendra accused Zuckerberg of intentionally making them believe he could help them build a social network called HarvardConnection.com, later called ConnectU. They filed a lawsuit in 2004. It was dismissed on a technicality on March 28, 2007. It was refiled soon thereafter in a federal court in Boston. Facebook countersued in regards to Social Butterfly, a project put out by the Winklevoss Chain Group in alleged partnership between ConnectU and i2Hub. On June 25, 2008, the case settled and Facebook agreed to transfer over 1.2 million common shares and paid $20 million in cash. In 2005, Facebook co-founder Eduardo Saverin filed a lawsuit against Zuckerberg and Facebook alleging that Zuckerberg had illegally spent Saverin's money on personal expenses. The lawsuit was settled out of court, and through terms of the settlement were sealed, the company affirmed Saverin's title as co-founder of Facebook, and Saverin agreed to stop talking to the press. In June 2010, then Pakistani Deputy Attorney General Mohammed Azhar Siddique launched a criminal investigation into Zuckerberg and Facebook co-founders Dustin Moskovitz and Chris Hughes after a Draw Muhammad contest was hosted on Facebook. The investigation also named the anonymous German woman who created the contest. Siddique asked the country's police to contact Interpol to have Zuckerberg and the three others arrested for blasphemy. On May 19, 2010, Facebook's website was temporarily blocked in Pakistan until Facebook removed the contest from its website at the end of May. Siddique also asked its UN representative to raise the issue with the United Nations General Assembly. On April 10th and 11th, 2018, Zuckerberg testified before the United States Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation regarding the usage of personal data by Facebook in relation to the Facebook Cambridge Analytica data scandal. He called the whole affair a breach of trust between Alexander Kogan, Cambridge Analytica, and Facebook. Zuckerberg refused requests to appear to give evidence on the matter to a parliamentary committee in the United Kingdom. On October 1st, 2020, the U.S. Senate Commerce Committee unanimously voted the issue to subpoena the CEOs of three top tech firms, including Zuckerberg, Google's Sundar Pichai, and Twitter's Jack Dorsey. The subpoenas aim to force the CEOs to testify about the legal immunity the law affords tech platforms under Section 230 of the Communication Acts of 1934. U.S. Republicans argue that the law unduly protected social media companies against allegations of anti-conservative censorship. On March 25, 2021, Zuckerberg testified before the House Energy and Commerce Committee regarding Facebook's role in the spread of misinformation and hate speech on the platform. During the hearing, he was questioned about Facebook's handling of user data, its role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol building, and its efforts to combat misinformation and hate speech. Zuckerberg acknowledged that Facebook had a responsibility to address these issues and outlined the steps that the company is taking to improve its policies and practices. The hearing was part of a broader effort by Congress to hold tech companies accountable for their role in shaping public discourse and protecting user privacy. Court documents allege that Zuckerberg personally rejected Meta's proposal to improve teenagers' mental health. He consistently opposed efforts to enhance well-being on Facebook and Instagram, overriding senior executives like Instagram head Adam Mosseri and Global Affairs President Nick Clegg, as revealed in an ongoing lawsuit. Internal communications disclosed in the Massachusetts-initiated legal action depict Zuckerberg's resistance to better protect over 30 million teens on Instagram in the U.S., highlighting his substantial influence on Meta's decisions impacting billions of users. These documents also shed light on occasional tensions between Zuckerberg and other Meta officials advocating for improved user well-being. Philanthropy. Now Mark Zuckerberg has done a lot of philanthropy. I will only touch on some to illustrate my point. I will leave links in the show notes to him and to all other individuals I have talked about if you would like to learn more. Here we go. Zuckerberg founded the startup Education Foundation on September 22, 2010. It was reported that he had donated $100 million to Newark Public Schools, the public school system of New York. In 2010, Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and investor Warren Buffett signed the Giving Pledge, in which they said they would donate to charity at least half of their wealth over the course of time, and invited others among the wealthy to donate 50% or more of their wealth to charity. In December 2012, Zuckerberg and his wife Priscilla Chan said that over the course of their lives, they would give the majority of their wealth to advancing human potential and promoting equality in the spirit of the Giving Pledge. On December 1st, 2015, Zuckerberg and Chan pledged to transfer 99% of their Facebook shares, then valued at $45 billion, to the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative. The funds would not be transferred immediately, but over the course of their lives. Instead of forming a charitable corporation to donate the value of the stock to, as Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, and other billionaires have done, Zuckerberg and Chan chose to use the structure of a limited liability company. Some journalists and academics have said that the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative conducts philanthrocapitalism. In 2016, the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative gave $600 million to create the tax-exempt charity Chan-Zuckerberg BioHub, a collaborative research space in San Francisco's Mission Bay district near the University of California, San Francisco. with the intent to foster interaction and collaboration between scientists at UCSF, University of California, Berkeley, and Stanford University. Intellectual property generated would be jointly owned by BioHub and the Discoverer's Home Institution. Unlike foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which open up all research funded to unrestricted access and reuse by the public, BioHub retained the right to commercialize any research it funds. Investors will have the option of making their discoveries open source with permission from BioHub. To increase access to scientific research and promote open science, CZ BioHub requires its investigators and staff scientists to publish submitted manuscripts and related data on preprint servers like bioRxiv. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, Zuckerberg donated $25 million to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation-backed accelerator that is searching for treatments for the diseases. He also announced $25 million in grants to support local journalism that was impacted by the pandemic and $75 million in advertisement purchases in local newspapers by Facebook Incorporated, where Facebook would market itself. Mark's political leanings. Zuckerberg has never revealed his own political affiliation or voting history. Some news outlets consider him to be a conservative, while others consider him to be a liberal. On February 13, 2013, Zuckerberg hosted his first ever fundraising event for then New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Zuckerberg's particular interest on this occasion was education reform, and Christie's education reform work focused on teachers, unions, and the expansion of charter schools. Later that year, Zuckerberg hosted a campaign fundraiser for then Newark Mayor Cory Booker, who was running in the 2013 New Jersey special Senate election. In September 2010, with the support of the governor, Chris Christie, Booker obtained a $100 million pledge from Zuckerberg to Newark Public Schools. When questioned about the mid-2013 PRISM scandal at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference in September 2013, Zuckerberg stated that the U.S. government blew it. He further explained that the government performed poorly in regard to the protection of the freedoms of the citizens, the economy, and companies. In January 2017, he criticized Donald Trump's executive order to severely limit immigrants and refugees from some countries. Zuckerberg funded a state-level ballot initiative for the 2020 general election that would raise taxes by altering California's Proposition 13 to require the tax assessment of commercial and industrial properties in the state at market rate. Okay, let's look at Mark Zuckerberg and see if he meets the criteria for a robber baron. 1. Exploited workers. I can't find much about him exploiting workers, but judging by his lawsuits, it seems that he's been charged with exploiting users' data and I think early in his career, his business partners. Number 2, employed political entrepreneurship. He eschews political affiliation and generally wants to make the world a better place. He seems to be more bipartisan than anything else. 3, engaged in monopolistic practices. As big as Facebook is, there are a lot of other social media outlets you can turn to, like TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn. They all have their own niche and kind of work together, really. You notice I didn't mention Instagram because essentially Facebook and Instagram are really the same thing. 4, engaged in philanthropy later in the career. With the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative pledging to give 99% of their wealth away in their lifetime, they seem to be better than most billionaires in that department. We can quibble about how much the initiative was set up, but ultimately, there's no malice in it. Well, if you ask me, he fails. When you look at everything his creation has gone through, looks to be mostly misunderstandings or growing pains of navigating a path less traveled. I don't see anything but a tech entrepreneur trying to make the world a better place. If you can use that cliche, it's using the HBO comedy Silicon Valley, so I guess I could use it too. Well, there you have it. 3 modern-day tycoons and an evaluation of whether they are considered robber barons. The major difference between 19th century and modern-day robber barons is that the action of the 19th century robber barons precipitated laws that the modern-day robber barons had to interpret. Of course, the success of litigation determined how well they did. All right. That's all for this episode of Success Before the Internet. I hope you found it enjoyable informative, and entertaining. Thank you for tuning in. You can find us on Facebook or any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. Or you can go to our website, successbeforetheinternet.com, to get all our episodes streaming there. You can also email me at successbeforetheinternet@gmail.com with any comments about the show. All the music in the show is from my band Sideshow. Our music can be found on SoundCloud under the name Sideshow Band 72. So until next time, I'm Dan Vespa. And remember, there was success before the internet. We just forgot.